So the final section that you may see in some of these exams would be, some people call it definition, other people call it identify or identification, but essentially it's a listing of words or terms that have something to do with the more important aspects of what you were going over all semester. So it's important to really understand that a lot of the times you're given a little bit of help in terms of having some of these words kind of relate to each other. So for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore my dog. She's barking at something. I'm going to take a look at a few historical terms. Okay, so I'm just going to list these up here the same way that they might be listed on an exam. Generally, the way it is there's like 8 to 10 terms, maybe as many as 15, but that's usually, unless the entire exam is identification, that's really unusual. Usually it says something like, of these 8 terms, please define 5. Or of these 10 terms, please define 5 or 6 of them, or something like that. So if we're taking a look, let's say you're taking American history before the Civil War, you might get something like Thomas Jefferson, Louisiana Purchase, I don't know, Mason-Dixon line, 3/5 compromise, Andrew Jackson, let's see, westward expansion, let's see, what would another one be? I'm trying to think. Dred Scott, and I don't know, Harriet Tubman. Okay, so when we take a look at this, let's say you had to answer 5 of the 8 of these. So you've got Thomas Jefferson, the Louisiana Purchase, the Mason-Dixon line, Harriet Tubman, 3/5 compromise, Andrew Jackson, westward expansion, and Dred Scott. So if we were taking a look and we'd have wanted to do, let's say we wanted to do Jefferson, Louisiana Purchase, Mason-Dixon line, 3/5, and westward expansion. So if we take a look, Thomas Jefferson relates to the Louisiana Purchase because the Louisiana Purchase was done while Jefferson was in office at his urging. So it doubled, or more than doubled, the size of the United States at that particular time. Jefferson was also someone who owned enslaved people. So the Mason-Dixon line, although I don't believe he was alive for that, and westward expansion would have come into some play with him, but because he was an architect of the Constitution, the 3/5 compromise was something that would be attached to him as well. If for whatever reason you haven't ever learned the 3/5 compromise, here's a quick and dirty definition of it, and it is dirty. The 3/5 compromise, basically there were a disproportionate number of African enslaved people, or just free black people, in the South as opposed to in the North, because how many seats you have in the House of Representatives is dependent upon your population. They wanted the southern states where slavery was, I mean, it was legal throughout the United States, but it was predominantly practiced in the South. But they wanted the people that they owned and claimed as property, the enslaved population, to count towards the South's population. Otherwise, they would get outvoted by the North on everything. So they compromised, the northern and the southern states compromised, and Jefferson was a part of this, to recognize each enslaved person, each person from Africa, as not an entire person, but 3/5 of a person. That way, the South didn't get a one-for-one population growth, sort of, or population estimate, but the enslaved population did count towards their representation in Congress. So basically, through the Mason-Dixon line, which was an imaginary line that went across one of the parallels, the invisible lines on a globe. Basically, the Mason-Dixon line suggested that slavery was not tolerated north of it to a large degree, and it was tolerated below it. So as the frontier expanded and we had westward expansion, if a new state was below the Mason-Dixon line, it tended to be a slave state. If it was above that line, it tended to be a northern or free state. So just looking at those 5 things, you can see how you would be able to use some of these in answering the other ones. Louisiana Purchase, which was done by Thomas Jefferson, kicked off westward expansion, which led to the Mason-Dixon line, and Jefferson also was partially responsible for the 3/5 compromise. For the Mason-Dixon line, it largely happened because of westward expansion and the 3/5 compromise. So you can see, as you have something like this, the more you can overlap and show the connections between these different terms, the better you'll tend to make in terms of grades, because it doesn't just show that you memorized what this thing is, but you can actually show how these things connect to other terms that your professor or your instructor considers important. And you can do the same thing with English, like lit exams. So let's say you were taking British Lit, and you had things revolving around Queen Elizabeth I, William Shakespeare, Edmund Spenser, Ben Jonson, Hamlet, things like that. Then you can connect those things sort of together from what was going on politically at the time to the politics of a bunch of the predominant writers of the time to then some of the works that they produced. So the same thing with psychology. If you can link famous psychologists or psychiatrists with theories that they have propagated over the years, or in, geography, you can talk about how, different situations led to different types of governments, or the geography of a region led to more isolationist tactics or caused conflict. Like, for example, the partitioning of Israel by the Western powers after World War II, into an area that is pretty much 99% Muslim of some denomination, has definitely contributed to political and military action over the last 60, 70 years or so. Not to say that one group is right and one group is wrong. It's just, if you drop a group of people into an area that traditionally have had hostile relationships between them, it's probably not going to get real good all of a sudden. So these definition or identification type of pools of questions or terms or vocabulary, usually you're going to be able to kind of connect the dots between a few of those. So I would suggest, if you have the option, to choose the ones that you know have some kind of connection to each other that you can explain. And again, with these, don't be too wordy. You want to only have these be, usually it's something like 50 to 100 words, maybe, that you get to write about this. So get in, relay your information, get out, don't repeat yourself, don't get too conversational, don't try and make it too creative. If you can do that and still be very effective in how you answer your questions, awesome. You're probably more skilled than a lot of people out there, but don't be married to that idea. Okay? All right. So just remember, with all of these, make sure you're really reading the questions. Look for connections or other relationships in questions in other portions of the exam, and do your best to stay on point, not be repetitive, and to mimic the language of your classroom. Okay, everyone? Have a wonderful day. If I can think of any other issues exam-wise, I will continue to make these videos. You have a great one. Bye.